She was young, wealthy, brilliant, beautiful, and she disappeared in broad daylight. On a clear winter morning in New York City, Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold stepped out of her family's Upper East Side townhouse wearing a stylish blue serge suit, a black velvet hat, and a long, luxurious coat. The date was December 12, 1910, the start of a typical day in Manhattan. She told her mother she was going shopping for a new dress at Brentano's, a popular bookstore on Fifth Avenue. It was nothing unusual, just another shopping trip. Dorothy was 25 years old, a socialite from one of New York's most affluent families, the daughter of a high-powered Wall Street import-export magnate. She was educated, privileged, and known for her wit, charm, and ambition. She left the house shortly before 11 a.m. and walked down 79th Street. She smiled at a neighbor she passed, crossed Fifth Avenue, and headed toward the shopping district. Multiple people would see her that day. She bought chocolate from Park and Tilford. She visited the bookstore. She chatted briefly with a friend named Gladys King around 2 p.m. and said she was planning to walk through Central Park before going home. And then nothing. No witnesses, no screams, no sightings. She vanished into thin air. No one saw her walk into a building. No one saw her cross the park. She never returned home. She never showed up anywhere again. The city swallowed her. For hours, her absence raised no alarms. After all, she was a grown woman, intelligent, independent, and well-dressed. But as night fell, and Dorothy still hadn't come home, the unease in the Arnold household began to curdle into terror. They waited. Then they waited more. They never called the police. Not for weeks, because in their world, the world of elite New York society, scandal was worse than tragedy. The Arnolds were terrified of embarrassment. They thought Dorothy had run off with a man, or disgraced herself, or worse, been arrested. They didn't want reporters sniffing around. They didn't want the family name in the headlines, so they hired Pinkerton detectives in secret. They began asking around quietly, discreetly. Dorothy's father, Francis Arnold, paid agents out of pocket to travel to Boston, Philadelphia, even Europe, searching for signs that his daughter had simply walked away from her life. But there were no tickets in her name, no ship manifests, no letters, no luggage, no trace. Every trail was cold. Every theory fell apart under scrutiny. And then, as the silence became unbearable, the family's worst fear arrived, not in the form of a ransom note, but in nothing at all. No demand, no confession, no answers, just empty time. And when the press finally caught wind of the story weeks later, it exploded. Headlines screamed across the country. Heiress disappears in daylight. Society girl vanishes on Fifth Avenue. Mysterious silence in Arnold family. And yet beneath the public frenzy, one bone-deep question lingered. How does a young woman from one of the most powerful families in New York disappear completely, in broad daylight, with no one seeing a thing? This wasn't the slums. This wasn't a back alley at midnight. This was upper-crust Manhattan at Christmas time. Crowded streets, packed shops, constant foot traffic. Dorothy Arnold wasn't poor. She wasn't forgotten. She had every privilege a young woman in 1910 could possibly dream of. And yet her story ends mid-sentence, like a candle snuffed out in a windless room. For over a century, the case has haunted historians, criminologists, amateur detectives, and the city itself. Theories have surfaced that she died in a botched abortion, that she ran away to Europe, that she was murdered by someone she trusted, or abducted by a stranger in broad daylight. But every theory hits the same wall. No evidence, not one clue beyond that final afternoon. Not a body, not a witness, not a sound. Just a 25-year-old woman who said she was going shopping and never came back. Tonight we're walking through the world Dorothy knew, the marble foyers of high society, the expectations placed on wealthy daughters, the secrets families kept hidden at all costs. We're diving deep into the days, the hours, the final minutes of her known life, and the chilling silence that followed. This is not just the story of a missing woman. It's the story of an invisible disappearance in plain sight, a crack in the smooth surface of America's golden age. Because when Dorothy Arnold vanished, it wasn't just her that disappeared. It was trust, safety, certainty, and the illusion that money could protect you from horror. She vanished without a cry. She vanished without a struggle. She vanished and was never seen again. But someone somewhere knows what happened to her, and by the time this story ends, you might too. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was not an ordinary woman, but in some ways, that was exactly her problem. She was born on July 1st, 1885, into the kind of wealth and pedigree that makes names echo in boardrooms. Her father, Francis R. Arnold, was a successful importer of fine goods and the head of the F.R. Arnold and Company. He descended from a line of early American settlers and boasted Mayflower blood, the kind of ancestry that money couldn't buy, and he knew it. Dorothy was his second child and his eldest daughter. In a world where daughters were expected to charm, marry well, and disappear quietly into society pages, Dorothy had other ideas. She was smart, genuinely smart, not the empty elegance of high society but a voracious reader, a quiet intellectual. She graduated from Bryn Mawr College, one of the few elite institutions that accepted women at the time. There she studied literature and languages, with a strong interest in creative writing. While many of her classmates saw education as a way to become more marriageable, Dorothy wanted more. She wanted to be a writer, a real writer, and dreamed of being published in the Atlantic Monthly or even the New Yorker. But it wasn't just ambition, it was rebellion, in the most elegant form. She was trying to break free of the box society had built around her. But Dorothy wasn't a dramatic rebel. She didn't run off with strangers or dye her hair. She wore pearls. She walked neatly through her world. Her rebellion was subtle, polite, invisible to many, and yet it terrified her family. You see, in 1910, being a woman of independent thought was dangerous in its own right, especially if you came from old money. Her mother, Mary Arnold, was a quiet but formidable socialite, obsessed with appearances and conformity. Her father, Francis, had no time for nonsense. Writing in his mind was a hobby for poor people. If Dorothy had any real talent, he once told a reporter, she wouldn't have to disappear to find success. And that wasn't just post-disappearance bravado, it was exactly how he felt while she was alive. Francis had repeatedly mocked her attempts to publish, even refusing to support her financially when she wanted to move out of the family home and get her own apartment. Dorothy submitted short stories under pseudonyms. When they were rejected, which happened more than once, her father used it as proof that writing wasn't a future, just a phase. So she stayed home, in a gilded cage, behind the walls of their mansion at 108 East 79th Street. Dorothy was suffocating under quiet pressure. No scandal, no independence, no mistakes. She was expected to marry well, host dinners, and never embarrass the family name, and yet she resisted. She walked miles through the city alone. She read poetry in the park. She was romantically involved with a man named George Griscom Jr., a wealthy but unapproved suitor. Her parents hated him. They considered him beneath their class, despite his wealth, partly because he was 9 years older, and partly because he was seen as immature and aimless. But Dorothy adored him. She wrote him passionate letters. They snuck away together. She even lied to her family to meet him in Boston, a scandalous move at the time for an unmarried woman. There's strong reason to believe that on the day she vanished, Dorothy was still writing to George, and may have even planned to meet him again in secret. Her desire for independence wasn't just professional, it was personal, emotional, urgent, and perhaps most dangerous of all, she was desperate to get out. Now combine that with what else we know. Her last published writing was rejected again, just weeks before her disappearance. Friends reported that she seemed frustrated, withdrawn. Her relationship with George was strained, and she had no real escape from her family. In short, Dorothy was a 25-year-old woman, born into a world that told her she had everything: money, elegance, status, and yet she felt like she had nothing she actually wanted. So here's the question. When Dorothy walked out the door that cold December morning, was she really just going to shop for a dress, or was she trying to leave something behind? Was she on her way to meet George in secret? Was she running away from home, or walking into a trap? Did someone follow her, watching from afar, as she made her way through the crowded streets of Manhattan? And if so, how did they make her disappear, in the center of one of the busiest cities in the world? This is what makes her case so terrifyingly unique. It's not just that she vanished, it's how cleanly it was done, how quietly. You'd think with her wealth and privilege, she would be protected. But perhaps that very privilege kept her vulnerable, because the people around her refused to believe anything bad could really happen to someone like her. They weren't looking, they weren't prepared, and by the time they were, it was far too late. Behind the image of the polished young debutante, Dorothy Arnold was living a second life, one carefully hidden from the society she came from. And at the center of that second life was a man named George Griscom Jr. George wasn't a bad man, but he was exactly the type of man Dorothy's parents would never approve of. He was older, 42 years old to Dorothy's 25. He wasn't a New Yorker, he was from Pittsburgh. He wasn't working, he lived off a trust fund. To the Arnolds, that translated into one word: unacceptable. But to Dorothy, George represented something far more powerful than just love. He symbolized freedom, emotional independence, a life on her own terms. They had met sometime in 1909, during one of her family's regular outings, but their relationship had remained a secret from her parents, at least in the beginning. When the Arnold family eventually discovered the romance, they were outraged. Francis Arnold, her father, forbade her from seeing George again. He called him beneath her station. He even reportedly referred to George as a social nobody. But Dorothy didn't let go. The two continued writing letters, secret, passionate, and sometimes desperate. Dorothy's emotions ran deep, and in those letters, you could sense her entrapment. Her need to be seen, to be loved, and most of all, to escape the stifling prison of privilege she had grown up in. One letter in particular, found after her disappearance, stood out. In it she confided to a friend, "If I cannot make a good showing, the only thing for me to do is to disappear." At the time, it sounded poetic, but looking back, it reads like a warning. In September 1910, just 3 months before she would vanish, Dorothy did something drastic. She told her family she was going to visit friends in Boston for the weekend. That wasn't unusual. Dorothy had made a habit of traveling now and then. But what her family didn't know was that she was going to Boston to meet George. She stayed at the Hotel Lenox under an assumed name, and according to hotel staff, she seemed agitated and nervous. She wasn't there for a romantic getaway. She was there to make a decision. According to reports later uncovered, Dorothy had tried, unsuccessfully, to persuade George to marry her during that trip. She believed if they eloped, she could finally leave her family behind, escape the expectations, and build a life that was hers. But George said no, he didn't feel ready, and with that Dorothy returned to New York, not just heartbroken, but emotionally and mentally unraveling. She felt abandoned, rejected. Even her great escape plan, marriage to the one man she believed loved her, had failed. This wasn't just a failed relationship, it was the collapse of her exit strategy, the final blow in a year filled with disappointments. To understand just how deeply Dorothy was hurting, you have to understand her ambitions. More than anything else, Dorothy wanted to be a writer, not a hobbyist, not a girl with a pen, a real published literary figure. She wrote short stories and essays, often isolating herself for hours in her room, laboring over drafts. She submitted one of her stories to McClure's magazine, a major literary publication at the time, and waited weeks for a reply. When it came, the answer was brutal: rejection. According to friends, Dorothy was crushed, But she didn't give up. She submitted again, this time to the Century magazine, another well-known publication, another rejection. Her mother, Mary Arnold, reportedly mocked her writing behind her back. Francis, her father, discouraged her, saying that no daughter of his should lower herself to a working woman's career. Even her siblings brushed her off. No one saw what she saw in herself, and worst of all, her dream was becoming a source of shame, not pride. One friend later recalled that Dorothy had considered moving out, renting a small apartment in the city, and writing full-time. But for a woman in her position, that was practically unthinkable in 1910. Unmarried, living alone, it would have been a scandal. So she stayed, in the same home, with the same people who didn't believe in her. Living in a Fifth Avenue mansion was supposed to be a dream, but Dorothy's life was governed by rules, not just from her parents, but from society itself. She had to look the part, walk the right way, wear the right dresses, attend the right functions. She was a prisoner of etiquette, and unlike her more obedient siblings, Dorothy was becoming increasingly restless under those pressures. She didn't want a husband chosen for his wealth. She didn't want her future dictated by debutante luncheons and social calls. She didn't want to wear a corset and smile while dying inside. More and more, she withdrew. Her letters grew darker. Her dreams grew more distant. People described her as melancholy in the weeks before her disappearance. She had started going on long walks alone, not the norm for a young woman of her station. She would often disappear for hours, returning with little explanation of where she had gone. Her parents started to notice her silence. Her siblings said she had grown strange, but no one asked questions. A few weeks before she vanished, Dorothy visited a jewelry store in the city. She didn't buy anything, but she asked strange questions. She inquired about selling a ring, asked how much it was worth, and then left abruptly. That same day she visited a second-hand bookstore. She browsed aimlessly, barely touching the books. The clerk later said she looked distracted, as if she was somewhere else. 2 days before she vanished, she had lunch with a friend, and confided that things were not going well. She didn't elaborate, just smiled, changed the subject, and moved on. Her final known letters to George, sent just days before December 12, were filled with longing, desperation and silence between the lines. And on the morning of her disappearance, Dorothy left her family home, wearing her finest clothes. No note, no goodbye, just a soft, distracted voice to her mother, "I'm going out to buy a dress." She never came back. The more they searched, the less they understood. The city had swallowed Dorothy Arnold whole, and now it mocked those who tried to find her. After the January 25, 1911 press explosion, everything changed. What had once been a quiet, tightly guarded family mystery was now a national obsession. Dorothy's name was on every street corner, whispered in every parlor, printed on the front of every newspaper. The case was no longer just a missing person. It was a spectacle. The New York Police Department, having only been informed weeks after the fact, immediately assigned detectives to the case. Posters went up around Manhattan. Letters poured into police stations and the Arnold residence. Hundreds of tips, sightings, and wild accusations flooded in. Within a few days, over 300 separate leads had been investigated. None of them panned out. One caller said she'd seen Dorothy in Philadelphia, working in a department store under a fake name. Another tip claimed she'd boarded a steamer to Europe from the docks in Hoboken, wearing a red wig. Someone swore she'd been taken by force, shoved into a carriage just a block from Brentano's bookstore. But time and again, each lead fell apart under scrutiny. There was no footage, no photographic evidence, and no witnesses willing to swear under oath. And then came the letters. Just days after her disappearance, Francis Arnold allegedly received a letter postmarked from New York City, written in what he believed was Dorothy's handwriting. It read simply, "I am safe. Don't worry, I will write again soon." But Dorothy never wrote again, and the letter was never produced for the public or shown to police. Francis Arnold said he destroyed it, claiming he didn't want it published in the press. This single act would haunt the case forever. Was it really Dorothy? If so, why destroy the only proof she was alive? If not, who sent it, and why? The more famous the case became, the more deranged the leads became. In February 1911, just 2 months after the disappearance, a woman from California walked into a San Francisco police station claiming she was Dorothy Arnold. She said she'd been kidnapped, drugged, and left penniless on the West Coast. But her story unraveled fast. She wasn't even close to matching Dorothy's identity. Then in March, police received a tip from a psychic in Chicago claiming Dorothy had been murdered and buried in Central Park. This triggered one of the most desperate searches in the case. For nearly a week, a team of officers and park workers combed the woods near 86th Street, digging into snowpacked ground, lifting rocks, and even draining a portion of a pond. They found nothing, no grave, no signs of a struggle, not even a scrap of cloth. It was just another dead end. Meanwhile, all eyes turned to the man at the center of Dorothy's private life, George Griscom Jr. After weeks of silence, he finally returned from Italy and was hounded by reporters at every turn. He denied any involvement. He insisted he had loved Dorothy and had no knowledge of where she'd gone. But the press didn't buy it, and neither did the public. How could he not know anything? Why hadn't she left a letter? Why had she wired him $500 just days before disappearing? The most disturbing theory, that Dorothy had become pregnant, and George had refused to help, pushing her into a desperate act or leading her into the hands of someone promising help. This theory took on new life when rumors began to circulate about illegal clinics operating quietly on the Upper West Side, shadowy underground facilities that handled women's issues quietly and without questions. One of the strongest and most haunting theories emerged months later. A tipster in Pittsburgh claimed that Dorothy had died following a failed abortion attempt at a private facility run out of a doctor's home. The claim was detailed. The informant said Dorothy had traveled to Pennsylvania under a fake name, checked in, and never left. Her body, they claimed, had been secretly cremated to destroy evidence. When pressed for more details, the informant vanished. Still, the theory gained traction. It explained the missing body, the secrecy, the sudden disappearance. But once again, no records, no names, no witnesses. Without hard evidence, it was just another theory added to the growing pile. As months passed, Francis Arnold became increasingly bitter and frustrated. He refused to believe his daughter had run away. He was convinced she had met with foul play, and possibly worse. In an interview, he was quoted as saying, "I believe my daughter is dead. I believe she was killed the day she disappeared. We have done everything possible to find her, and there is nothing more to be done." He openly criticized the police and their lack of urgency. But ironically, his own delay in reporting the disappearance had significantly hampered the early investigation. And now it was too late to recover those first critical hours. He also refused to allow full access to Dorothy's belongings. When police requested to examine all of her letters, diaries, and personal items, Francis declined, stating it was a private matter. Some began to speculate, was he hiding something? As 1911 became 1912, the case took a darker turn. Dorothy was now presumed dead by many, but the sightings never stopped. She was spotted in a mental asylum in upstate New York, seen working as a servant in New Jersey. One man claimed he saw her boarding a train in Albany, headed west. The stories kept coming. Each time, reporters followed up. Investigators made calls. Private detectives knocked on doors, and each time, the trail ended in silence. The case grew colder. Back at the Arnold home, Dorothy's bedroom remained just as she left it. Her mother refused to change a single detail. The bed was made. Her writing desk, still stacked with papers, the burned fragments in the fireplace remained a mystery. Had she destroyed rejection letters, diary entries, a farewell note? Nobody knew. But that room, frozen in time, became a shrine to what might have been. By the time 1913 rolled around, Dorothy Arnold had become a ghost story, a whispered legend. The police officially declared the case unsolved. Private investigators moved on to new clients, and the public, hungry for new scandals, forgot. But not everyone moved on. Her mother, Mary Arnold, never fully recovered. She avoided the press, shunned public life, and spent most of her time in seclusion. Francis Arnold died in 1922, never knowing what happened to his daughter. And with that, the last person who might have known everything. George Griscom faded quietly from the public eye, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. If she wasn't murdered, then where is she? If she ran away, why didn't she tell anyone? And if she died, why was her body never found? More than a century has passed since Dorothy Arnold vanished, yet the questions surrounding her fate remain disturbingly unanswered. But they're not without theories. And some of them, they'll make your blood run cold. Theory 1. Voluntary disappearance. She ran away and never came back. One of the earliest and most enduring theories is simple. Dorothy Arnold vanished because she wanted to vanish. Some believe that rejection, social pressure, and romantic frustration pushed her over the edge, that she quietly slipped away to start a new life, perhaps in Europe or out west, living under a false identity. Evidence supporting this: she was seen purchasing chocolates, seemingly relaxed and in no distress. She was dressed modestly, nothing that would have drawn attention. She had written of escaping the expectations of her social circle. She withdrew money prior to her disappearance and attempted to wire more. And crucially, no trace of her body was ever found. But this theory comes with holes large enough to drive a train through. Dorothy was deeply connected to her family, particularly her mother. Her letters and actions, while tinged with sadness, never hinted at running away. She left no goodbye note, no detailed plan, and took none of her belongings. If she meant to vanish, she did it with near superhuman precision. No leaks, no tracks, no accidental letters or photos for over a century. Could she really have succeeded in pulling off the greatest disappearing act of the Gilded Age? Or is it just the theory people tell themselves, because the truth is too ugly to face? Theory 2. Suicide. A quiet exit from a world that didn't want her. This is a darker theory, and one that sadly aligns with some of the patterns seen in similar cases. Some speculate that Dorothy, already battling humiliation from literary rejection and societal pressures, took her own life shortly after leaving the bookstore. This would explain her sudden disappearance, and why she never contacted anyone again. The arguments here: her recent manuscript had been rejected, and the response had devastated her. She may have been pregnant and felt trapped. Her father disapproved of the man she loved. She had been humiliated by an earlier incident involving George Griscom. Her actions that day, walking alone, buying chocolates, visiting bookstores, may have been her quiet way of saying goodbye. But again, if she did take her own life, where is her body? A suicide in Central Park, someone would have found her. A leap into the Hudson River, perhaps. But even then, bodies typically surface, unless she didn't die alone, unless someone helped cover it up. And that brings us to a far more chilling possibility. Theory 3. Foul play. She was abducted and murdered that afternoon. This is the theory that kept investigators awake at night, that Dorothy Arnold left Brentano's bookstore and was followed, perhaps by a stranger, perhaps by someone she knew, and was never seen again. She may have been abducted just blocks from her home. It's chilling to think about. Broad daylight, Fifth Avenue, the heart of Manhattan, and she vanished into thin air. Could someone have grabbed her, lured her into a car or carriage, rendered her unconscious, even in a bustling city? It's possible, especially if she trusted them. What adds weight to this theory? There were no known witnesses after she left the bookstore. Her family delayed reporting her missing, giving any perpetrator time to flee. There were multiple underground criminal operations running through New York at the time: brothels, human trafficking rings, and black market medical clinics. And finally, a body is far easier to hide when you know how. If someone wanted Dorothy gone, really gone, New York was the perfect place. This theory becomes even more sinister when you consider the next possibility. Theory 4. The abortion clinic cover-up, a deadly secret hidden by high society. This theory, while disturbing, refuses to fade. It gained traction in the early 1910s and has since become one of the most discussed. The idea: Dorothy was pregnant. Desperate to avoid shame and family disgrace, she sought an illegal abortion, which was both dangerous and highly stigmatized at the time. These underground clinics operated in back alleys, brownstones, and doctors' homes, often in secret, with no medical oversight. Dorothy may have entered one such place and never walked out. The supporting elements: her secret romance with George Griscom, the desperate $500 wire she sent just days before, her family's total refusal to discuss anything related to pregnancy, and the eerie silence from George Griscom after the case went public. There were whispers, never proven, that a doctor in Pennsylvania had handled the procedure and cremated her remains after she died. If that's true, it would mean everyone, George, the doctor, possibly even Dorothy's family, played a part in keeping it hidden, because in that era, scandal could destroy entire families, and the Arnold name was one of the most important in New York. Theory 5. She fled, and someone helped her stay gone. There's one more theory, and it's more terrifying in a subtle, quiet way. It says Dorothy didn't disappear alone, that someone, a friend, an unknown benefactor, or even George Griscom, helped her escape her life, that a plan was in place, and she walked away with someone's guidance. Maybe she was taken to a safe house, given a new name, sent to another state, or another country, and for reasons we'll never know, she chose to never look back. What's frightening about this theory? It means someone out there, perhaps long dead now, knew the truth all along, knew she didn't die, knew where she was, and said nothing, because they were told not to, or paid not to. One final, chilling possibility. The family knew this is a theory no one likes to speak aloud, that perhaps, just perhaps, the Arnold family knew more than they ever let on, that Frances Arnold's destruction of the letter wasn't just about privacy, that their refusal to share her diaries, her writings, her movements that day, was all part of a larger effort to bury the truth. What if Dorothy had told them where she was going? What if they knew about the clinic? What if they arranged her disappearance themselves? Too much speculation, maybe. But in the absence of facts, speculation is all that remains. Where does that leave us? Over 100 years later, there's still no body, no confirmed sightings, no death certificate, no grave, no final words. Dorothy Arnold simply vanished. She became a mystery so big, so frustrating, so utterly unresolved, that she's now used in criminal justice textbooks as a case study in what not to do during an investigation. Her name lives on, not because of who she was, but because of what she became: a ghost of New York, a girl in a blue hat, a promise unfulfilled, and a question that no one has ever answered. There's something strange about silence. It lingers, it hums at the edges of crowded rooms, it follows you home, curling around the back of your neck when no one's there. And the silence left behind by Dorothy Arnold, it's deafening. A young woman, 25 years old, bright, ambitious, steps out on a December morning to run errands, and is never seen again. No phone call, no ransom note, No screams, no struggle, just a void. A pause in history where a name should be. You have to ask yourself, how does someone just vanish in the middle of New York City? The answer, if there is one, doesn't lie in any single theory. It's in the sum of them. The way the police dismissed her, the way her family protected their name more than their daughter's truth, the way the press turned tragedy into spectacle, and the way the city, the world, and eventually time itself moved on. Maybe she ran, maybe she was taken, maybe something darker happened in the walls of her own home, something buried by money and shame. Maybe she was just tired of not being seen. In the end, we're left with fragments: a blue coat, a hat with a velvet rose, a box of chocolates, and a book of French satire. A single walk through a department store, and then darkness. She became a ghost of the Gilded Age, a mystery immortalized not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. And maybe deep down, that's what frightens us most. That one day, we too might slip through the cracks. That we might scream in a crowded city, and no one will hear. That we might be Dorothy. If you found yourself haunted by Dorothy Arnold's story, if you still feel the weight of her absence pressing against your chest, then you're not alone. This case has gripped hearts for over a century, and as long as people keep asking questions, Dorothy will never truly disappear, because stories like hers never end. They echo through cobblestone streets, in the eyes of strangers on the subway, in a face that looks too familiar in a passing crowd. So the next time you walk alone, and the wind seems to carry a whisper, listen closely. You might just hear her name. This has been another episode of the Red Tape Crime Files. If Dorothy Arnold's story stayed with you, if her silence echoed in the same places you fear your own, do one thing before you go. Like, subscribe, and share her story, because silence may hide truth, but you can help make sure it's never forgotten. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the missing don't always stay gone. Sometimes they come back, in questions.